Okay, welcome everybody to our Agroforestry Campfire Circle. Today we've got Jessica Robertson from Wildcraft Permaculture, who's going to be talking about community food forests. Okay, thank you, Jessica. Turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elliot. So uh, yeah, I'm representing Wildcraft Permaculture today, as well as United Designers. I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to talk about a few projects that I've been involved um, in the last 12 years since I started my business in permaculture design. So just a bit of background and context. I started out in biology and did a Bachelor of Education as well, and then um, decided I didn't want to do those things, and traveled a bit and realized that cities in other countries were designed very differently and could be much more sustainable than the way that we were doing them here. So I did a master's in urban planning and then worked in Edmonton for 4 years as the lead planner with an architecture firm there, doing some really awesome projects actually. And that was when I fell down the permaculture rabbit hole and took an intro course and then took my permaculture design course and decided to come back to Ontario for personal reasons with my family and start my own business in 2011. And in 2017, I was asked to do some collaborations with United Designers. And the timing worked out really well for me, as I just had my second child and I had some projects on the go. Being a one-woman show made it hard to do a lot with a newborn and a 4-year-old. So I've been partnering with them since then, and we're actually like a design collective kind of. So in everybody that's part of United Designers has their own business in countries around the world. So there's a couple of us in Canada, a few in the US, in Spain, the Netherlands, the UK, India. We're quite a diaspora, and so we come together on large projects and are able to collaborate. So last year I got to work on a project in France, and this year I'm working on a project in Fargo and North Dakota, and I've brought people in on my projects when I've needed extra support. So that's been a really great working relationship, and the ability to kind of expand my services into stuff that's maybe stretching my expertise a bit, but there are experts in the group that I can call on and we can brainstorm about things. So that's been really great. The range of stuff I do kind of goes from, I mean, I started out really being passionate about cities and the sustainability of cities, but I have branched out to do a lot of kind of homesteads and small acreages as well. So I still do some urban projects. I've done a couple of commercial industrial projects and some educational work, and then the public food forests and urban agriculture stuff, which is really fun, but also different, and because you're working with community entities instead of and sort of loose players instead of landowners or land stewards. So there are definitely challenges that come with that. So yeah, some of my biases are that cities are really vital cultural and creative hubs, economic engines. We totally rely on the hinterland around us, but there is so much more we could be doing in urban areas, and that community is one of the key things. Like there are so many benefits that come to being in a city in terms of the access you have to people and resources and expertise. So these are the case studies I'm going to look at. There are three public food forests in London that I've designed, and one in Brantford, Ontario. And I'm also open to taking questions throughout. So we'll leave some time at the end for questions, but feel free to interrupt if there's. I've turned off I can't see you guys, so don't just put your hand symbol up. Just unmute yourself and ask a question. Won't bother me. So the first food forest we did, I had only lived in London for really a few months, and I somehow met the right group of people that were, you know, there was they were activists and artists and urban agriculturalists, and they were trying to get urban chickens, a pilot project for urban chickens going in the city. And I had just left the fight in Edmonton, where we had just after I left Edmonton, they approved a pilot project there. Sadly, in London, we did not get approval for that, and it's just been sitting on the back shelf for the last 12 years because there doesn't seem to be any interest from the staff here for that at this point. Doesn't mean I don't know several people in the city that have chickens, but I won't give you their address. uh, so the Carolinian Food Forest was some of these people that I met. We approached the city and we said, we think there should be more urban agriculture. We should have edible boulevards. We should put fruit trees in all the parks. There used to be fruit trees in a lot of the parks in London. Like what happened? Why were they all cut down? And we honestly, I think we just approached the right person, or we were connected with the right person at the city. And she's amazing. Like she's been involved in all of these projects, and the city of London is notoriously slow at getting back on anything. And I can the person who's in charge of the one of the food forests I'm going to talk about in a little bit, I emailed 2 months ago and never got a response, and then followed up with another email and CC'd this person and got a response that day. so we were put in touch with the right person, and they said, hey, here's this acre that the city has kind of been naturalizing, and we've just let it go. We stopped mowing it a couple years ago, and it actually was originally it's down the banks, it's called South Branch Park. And if we looked at the old air photos, and there used to be market gardens down there, so the soil was great. It's floodplain, and there were still remnant apple trees from the old orchard that had been there. So that was pretty inspiring. And unfortunately, we had a lot of it had sort of, because it had been left to naturalize for a while, there were a lot of things that had colonized it already. There was big stand of Manitoba maples, and the deer were very happy in that site too, so that posed a big problem. And there were some of the grasses that were in there were very they're called succession inhibiting grasses, so they're very good at dominating a space and not allowing shrubs to establish. So there were challenges there, but we had good momentum around us and good community partnership with the local community center and library. And it's in a part of the city in the East End that was considered a food desert, so we got some extra funding for that. And there are a couple of schools nearby. Only one of them really got involved, but they would come out at least once a year and help with planting and some maintenance, and bring classes out for biology study and stuff. That project also, because of our funding partners, we partnered with Reforest London, and their mandate at the time was, still really is, to work with native species. So they do fruit. They do give away a lot of trees every year. Most of them are native species. Now they've integrated they give away a lot of like apple trees and pear trees and things that aren't native. They get fruit trees specifically. But at the time, we decided that the focus needed to be exclusively on Carolinian zone species. So that was an interesting constraint, but also a great learning curve for me, because I had been in the prairies for a decade, and when I lived in Ontario, I hadn't been quite this far south, and I wasn't that familiar with the Carolinian zone, and I was just blown away at the diversity and the number of edible species. And yeah, it was really cool. So we put a lot of energy into that for a few years, and then there was one of the members of the original group decided that it was not working out the way that they wanted it to be, and that it was a failed project, and they they basically started kind of pushing everybody away who'd been involved. So this is where the people approach, the people design needs to be, this was the hard lesson here was like the designing for the plants is the easy part. Designing around the people and the long-term maintenance and community is actually the hardest part. And we're still working on that with the other projects. But with this one, there was a very strong character who started anybody who got involved in the steering committee. She would find their details. She would email them, call them, tell them they were wasting their time, that they shouldn't be involved. So that was really disappointing. And she had been a good friend and as well. So that was hard. And so I kind of burnt out at some point from that, and the steering committee fell apart, partly from the harassment. And so nobody takes care of that project anymore. The plants that we planted, some of them are still there, some were destroyed by the deer, but natural succession is occurring. I'm not sure if any buckthorn removal has been happening or anything, but I mean, there's a lot of native species in there that hopefully are still kind of holding their own and thriving. And then there might be some invasives that have come in, but I know there is there's a small project within that food forest that an Indigenous partner with a couple of the local schools. He does their Indigenous programming. He started a food and medicine garden there, and so there is some programming happening down there, but he's kind of got this annual plot within the food forest, so he's not tending to the food forest itself. But yeah, so that's sort of been left fallow since 2018, and one day I'll go back there and suss it out and see how things are doing. But I just didn't have energy to put into that anymore. So this was the site. These are historic photos. You can see there's the orchard. There was agriculture happening down there. There were greenhouses down there at some point. The city there was also a lot of garbage being dumped over the hillside. So, So the city did some soil testing and stuff. This is the site here. This is 2 schools here. And there's a ballpark there, and there's a little community garden here. So it was this little piece here was the land we were given. And that was the initial design with one main path through it. This is the area, this is where the Indigenous garden is currently. And those were some of the species we put in. This was some of the site installation. It was interesting, we didn't actually plant any milkweed, but it came in full force on its own in year 2 after we sheet mulched a bunch of areas. And it's a great edible. At different times of year, you can eat different parts of it, and very underutilized, and obviously great habitat too. This water tank, a local artist did some, not yet, but I don't know if I have a picture of it after they painted it, but there was a local artist that got together with some youth groups and painted that, decorated it. This is my first daughter. She was the initial planting for the food forest happened like a couple weeks after she was born. So my mom was there to support me and help take care. I mean, she was pretty happy just to sit there, not do much. This is some of the school groups that we had involved, doing some planting, removing black walnuts in the areas where we didn't want them. We did leave some of the ones around the edges where we had buffers for them, but took out the seedlings that were in the middle of the food forest. And then did some foraging walks there over the years. So the second project we did in London was the Wood Street Food Forest. This is like a little tiny pocket park. It's surrounded by houses around the outside, and there's not really even like a sign to get in. It's just kind of a path between a couple of houses. And this was a really cool project that the city gave subside money to start. There was a lot of community interest from the neighbors around the park. One of them, Gabor Sass, is a key, like he's been involved in a lot of urban agriculture initiatives in the city, and his yard is like amazing. And so it kind of extends from his yard out into the space, and that whole neighborhood now there's all sorts of pollinator gardens and permaculture gardens. And then so this is the little tiny pocket park. Actually, it's this is it. This is the one border that there, oh, and here. So it's very small little space in the middle of the block. This was the initial planting of the Wood Street Food Forest, and we crammed a lot of stuff into that little tiny space. And then they got a grant a year or two later to build this gazebo and kind of extend out on the sides of it with some more food forest plants. And they host all sorts of events in here. Like they do a little Canada Day bicycle parade through the neighborhood, and it starts there in the middle of the food forest. And they've done apple pressing and harvest parties. And so that was the original design for that little tiny piece in the northwest corner. A couple of apples, a lot of sort of 4-in-1 choices to try and get some variety and pollination in such a small space. And then supporting species. And the ground cover was a lot of things donated from people's yards. We kind of had a list of what people would like and what people had. And then I made some suggestions on what would work well. There was a little hugelkultur mound built like at the back here. And yeah, this was year one. They decorated their rain barrels too. I don't know if they had an artist involved. I think it was very kid driven, but that's great. And they had a nice sign that one of the community members made. There's the Canada Day bike parade. And there's some kids harvesting currants. So the West Lines Food Forest isn't too far from Wood Street Food Forest. It's not quite in the same neighborhood, but the one adjacent over. And this one was a little bigger. It's about a half an acre. And it was chosen as the first neighborhood decision making program when they did a pilot for that. So this is a really cool program in London where each ward is given a certain amount of money, and any citizen in the city can recommend things that they think would improve their neighborhood. And then the city kind of curates those and narrows them down to ones they think are actually feasible or have enough support behind them, in terms of implementation and carrying through the project without the city having to do too much work. It's the citizens need to do it. And then everybody gets to vote on it. So you just go to the library, like my kids can vote. My kids submitted ideas. A couple of years ago, we submitted some ideas for our neighborhood, and they didn't get chosen by the voters, but it was still a fun process. And so this was in the pilot project before they rolled out the neighborhood decision making to the whole city. It was in this neighborhood first, and so this was one of the projects that was chosen. And there is a school right next to it. They don't utilize it too much. They did come out and do a little bit of planting. Their grade 6 class uses it a little bit for their biodiversity and growth pattern studies, but unfortunately they haven't been that involved. So for this one, we set up a stewardship model with an organization, which I think is a really great way to do it. Sanctuary London is a faith-based group that works with people experiencing homelessness in London. And so every Thursday morning, they would meet out on the site and they would do some weeding or mulching or watering or whatever needed to be done, and have community and teach people about the food forest and that they can harvest and that it's a gleaning forest for anybody to use, and then they could harvest things and bring it back to their food programs. most of what they were harvesting at that point was still just herbs and things. But then the food forest site expanded, and there was a large community garden next to it, and they were doing a lot of communal growing for their food bank. Their not food bank, but their like soup kitchen programs. Unfortunately, with they've just been overwhelmed in the last couple of years with the homelessness issues in London, and so they've had to step away from it, and it has been a bit neglected for the last 2 years. So I stepped in this year to kind of reinvigorate some energy around it, and now that my kids are a little older, I have some more time to put towards that. So we just had a work bee last weekend, yeah, last weekend on Saturday morning. We had the first work bee there in a couple of years. So I'll show some pictures of that in a little bit. This was, though it's in West Lions Park, this is the half-acre site that was chosen. There's a big ball diamond here. And then this area was turned into annual veggie gardens, but they're actually completely torn up right now because they're doing water main works through here. So there's like this much veggie garden left, which is sad because they were beautiful gardens. But hopefully it'll all get put back together, and next year they'll be able to grow there again. So this was done in 2 phases. We planted this in year 1, and then this one in year 2, and started with all the overstory and like the trees and shrub species, and then we planted the ground covers. That's sort of a sample of some of the things we planted. We kind of, this is the north end, so some bigger overstory trees here. Because there's a bit of deer pressure from the west side, so tried to put kind of thorny things around the edges of where their travel paths would be, like roses and sea buckthorn and gooseberry, and raspberries and blackberries and things to kind of shed them around the food forest. And actually, deer pressure has been very minimal here. There hasn't really been, rabbits have been more of a problem. There hasn't been any issues with deer really here. So I don't know if it's because of the school there that's so close, or that the park is well utilized. But so these are some pictures from like year 2 and then maybe year 4. Some workshops that we've held there. This is the annual garden that's adjacent to it. So much more tidy and neat rows and things. The food forest is a little more jungle-like. But this one was fun because it was big enough and we weren't constrained to native species. So we got to put in some fun things that were new to people, like medlars. I don't know if anybody on this call has tried a medlar or seen it. This is it growing. It was the first thing to fruit in the food forest, actually, so that was cool. And this is what they look like when they're ready to eat. You have to blet them, so they're like, it's like a persimmon where they have to be super ripe before you can eat them, or they're just that astringent where your whole mouth like loses all of its moisture. But once they blet or rot, they're actually super sweet and really good. We have some hazelnuts. Unfortunately, one of the hazelnuts got filbert blight, and so we had to cut that down. And the other 2 seem unaffected so far, but I have to keep an eye on them. And we have a chestnut hybrid that's been fruiting. I don't think anybody's managed to harvest them before the squirrels yet, but I'm keeping my eye on them so that one day I can. This is from the work bee. This was a grade 8 student at my kid's school. I mentored her this year for her final project. She did it on food forests, and so she actually got to design a food forest for the Museum of Archaeology in London. And not right now, sweetie.
After you're done, can you print a picture for me?
Tomorrow, okay? Okay, bye. Sorry. Not right now. I'm in a meeting. Ask Melissa. Yeah, so this she came out to help at the food forest and had lots of fun. We did a lot of tree clearing. Like I think we had 7 or 8 people out. I was hoping for 10, but we had a decent turnout. And there was a shelter that actually had been built, like somebody had carved it. It almost looked like if it had been a little bigger, it could have been a really cool cold storage. But especially because of the homelessness issues, and I mean, you couldn't even lie down in the space, but it was this little dugout space with a roof on it and stuff. So most of the most of the day was or morning was removing that structure and taking out weed trees because there were a lot of mulberry and Manitoba maple and locusts that needed to come out. That was the pile of brush that we were left with after 2 hours of work. And then the Brantford Food Forest is in Brantford in a park called Parsons Park. And I was actually contacted in 2017 by some people who were playing with the idea, and there was a group and they were pretty keen, but I don't think they were really quite organized well enough. And they had talked to the city, but I think the city was also a bit reluctant. They could sense that there wasn't really enough momentum, maybe. And then there was a bit of turnover in that group, and there was a new person who came in who really was super passionate, energetic about it. And then the city contacted me in 2019. And it was interesting. The process was so different with Brantford than with London. With London, it's sort of like, here's some land, here's like $600, do a design, thanks, it's all yours. We're not involved in the aftercare. We don't really care about they'll drop mulch for us. They'll take away that brush pile. They'll kind of support, like they'll fill up water tanks for us, but they're kind of hands off. The city of Brantford was very much wanted to be involved and know exactly the structure and review the plant list, and there was a lot more insight, oversight and involvement. And they wanted to do a 1-acre food forest, which I recommended was too big to start with. So we did like a master plan for it's a 1-acre site, the whole thing, but then we broke it down into 3 phases. So this is phase 1. We started at this end. This is phase 1, and then once that's built out and established, and they can prove to the city that it's being maintained and utilized and taken care of, then we'll do more detailed design for phase 2 and build that out, and then same thing for phase 3. So there's the master plan, and then the more detailed plan for phase 1, and that's the herbaceous layer. And they've been amazing. Like they have so many work bees and such an involved group of volunteers, and they also do a lot of workshops. So we're going to try and do some workshops this year at the Westlands Food Forest to bring people in, like drying tea harvesting workshop. There's tons of herbs and ground cover. There's not a lot of fruit production yet, but there's lots of flowers and herbs to collect, and currants and raspberries and blackberries, and so making some bath salts, making dried teas or herbal blends, and so I think that's a really good strategy. And yeah, they've been doing a lot of planting, and they and care for their space, and it looks great. This was one of their herb harvesting workshops and drying, and they've had like soup days and things where they make soups with using the herbs they've picked, and making bird feeders. And so some of the things I've learned from doing several public food forests, and I haven't been I've been brought in to do the design for them, but I haven't been that involved in doing the maintenance and aftercare for them. It's just too, I just haven't had the capacity to volunteer all that time for like all those different food forests. So I'm going to be more involved now in the Westlands Food Forest, but I haven't been that involved in that side of it. But in terms of getting them started, it's be patient, be persistent, and make sure you find the right person, because you might be told no the first time, and if you try somebody else in the same department or a different department. Parks and Rec department is who I've dealt with in the 2 different cities I've worked in, and honestly, like, coming from city planning background and in the other cities I've been in, I expected it to be a much longer process in London, and really they've been very happy to give, even though the Carolinian Food Forest was supposed to be our pilot project, and I would say it didn't go well because it kind of collapsed in the end, the social structure around it, but they still let us do 2 more anyways. So they've been really open to it, and some cities are going to need a little more work and a little more, seeing stuff on paper and making sure that you've really got some more formality around the structure and who's going to care for it and how and stuff. We're able to be a little more loosey-goosey here, which is great. Gabor and I were talking about when we were restarting the thing. I'm like, so should we form, like, maybe I could get a committee together? He's like, no committees. We're just going to have some work days. We're going to put it out there. People will come. So we'll see. Maybe we'll formalize it a bit more. Mary's probably cringing because I know she loves organizational structure. But there's just so much extra time that comes with that too. And I would like to get to a more formal structure of care for it, but at the moment we just need to get some quick energy in there and make it look good and look like it's still cared for and loved, so that the city doesn't take it away from us. And there's funding, like we've gotten funding from different city groups, from TD Friends of the Environment. There's different tree grants like Tree Me or Tree Canada. There's different funding you can find, and so sometimes you need to partner with a formal organization, like the Urban League of London or Thames Regional Ecological Association. There's different organizations you can find that are willing to be a partner to receive the funding for you because they're a registered nonprofit or charity. And I think it's also key to fund in those funding applications to fund expertise for somebody with design experience to come in, and not just there are several other projects through that neighborhood decision making program. There have been several other projects put forward where, like, let's put a bunch of fruit trees around this community garden, or let's do this, and several of them have been awarded the funding, and they haven't had a proper design or design process, and definitely haven't, well, partly because this individual who kiboshed the first project has been involved. They haven't had any social strength around them, and so the trees were planted, and then a couple years later they're taken out because they're dead and nobody's cared for them, or they weren't put in the right place, or just not properly thought through. So it's great. There's always momentum for planting, but not for the aftercare. So you've got to make sure that momentum carries through, and cultivate that, and not just, you can't just walk away from the trees after they're in the ground. Permaculture isn't that laissez-faire. And then screen planting donations. So you can also, a lot of rhubarb, lots of people have rhubarb they can split. That's great. But if you're looking for specific plants that to support your overstory species, or you're looking for nitrogen fixers, or you're looking for edible species, you want to make sure that you're getting the right things. Or if it's like all native, like the Carolinian one, we had to make sure that we weren't getting nativars or cultivars of native plants, that they had to actually be true native plants. And so those, and spend more time on the human design than the plant design. Develop community support in close proximity to the project, because one of the problems too was that first project, the person who kiboshed it in the end lived a couple blocks away from it, and then everybody else on the committee and who was involved lived on other parts of the city, and then one moved to St. Thomas, and so we weren't there to you know, it was a lot more work for us to drive there and be involved in it. So if you could, you really need to get those people that are adjacent to it and living right in that community on board. It needs to kind of come and not somebody else come in and say, hey, we're going to put this here. Who wants to be involved? Like it needs to, the momentum needs to come from within for it to really be successful. Like the Wood Street Food Forest, like that momentum was built. People started doing more edible backyard gardening first and boulevards and things, and then once that space was given for the food forest, there was everybody was like, wait, great, more room to plant stuff. I'm running out of space on my property. So so that was great because they were primed for it. And then finding community partners, like the, you know, Sanctuary London or school groups, or having you know, adults with disabilities come out, and there's all sorts of people that looking for ways to engage in the community, or organizations. So having them involved can be really beneficial. And yeah, think about your site preparation. Depending on the size of the site, you're going to want to approach that differently. Start small and build up the capacity, like in the Parsons Park Food Forest in Brantford, where they're, you know, they had this grand vision of an acre food forest, but that's a lot to manage. So, you know, bite off a small chunk, get that established and cared for, and then expand from there. And repeated engagement through work bees, but also through fun events for people, and show that you're, you know, show your success so that people want to share in it.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. Appreciate your time. Thank you everybody else for coming. Yeah, have a great rest of the evening. See you again soon.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks everybody.
Take care.